My name is Jonathan Reed. I'm 62, hair streaked with gray, knees aching when the weather turns cold, and a stomach that protests against too many steak dinners. In other words, I'm an ordinary American man who's lived long enough to know that designer clothes don't make you decent, and polished leather shoes can't cover up an empty soul. That afternoon, I stood outside my son Daniel's house for my grandson Oliver's 6th birthday. I wore my old brown coat that had followed me through years of construction sites. In my hands was a handmade gift, a small wooden boat I had cut, sanded, and painted for weeks. I even carved Oliver's name into the side. Kids these days prefer electronics, but I believe my grandson would understand the value of something made by his grandfather's unsteady hands. I rang the bell, the door opened, and there she was, under the harsh gold chandelier light, my so-called modern daughter-in-law, Vanessa. Wavy curls, dagger-long nails, perfume so strong it screamed I belonged to a higher class. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, pausing at my old coat and the shoes I had tried but failed to polish. A half smile curled on her lips. "Oh, you came too." The words hit like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending out cold ripples. I swore I heard muffled giggles from the living room. I nodded and held up the box. "Yes, I thought my grandson would be glad his grandfather is here. After all, it's his birthday." Vanessa tilted her head, lips curling like a second-rate actress pretending to be royalty. "Well, come in, but don't track sawdust on the floor. I just had it polished." I stepped inside. High ceilings, sparkling chandeliers, a dinner table staged like a magazine spread for rich people pretending to eat. Strangers in tailored suits and evening gowns filled the room, the type who wouldn't last 5 minutes on one of my job sites before asking, "Is there air conditioning?" I barely had time to breathe when a voice cried out, "Grandpa!" Oliver ran over, hands sticky with frosting, eyes glowing. I bent down and caught his hug. He smelled of cotton candy, his hair soft just like Daniel's when he was small. My heart warmed, but the joy lasted only seconds. A perfumed hand pulled him back. "Oliver, you'll stain your Gucci shirt." Vanessa bent close, her whisper loud enough for everyone to hear. "Remember what Mommy told you? Don't cling to someone who looks like he just walked out of a junkyard." Stifled laughter rippled around the table. I stood slowly, tightening my grip on the gift box. So I was the evening's entertainment. Instead of hiring a singer, they had me, the poor old man, free of charge. Dinner began. They placed me at the very end of the table, near an empty chair, far from the center where Vanessa sat like a queen and Daniel like her obedient servant. Dishes paraded out, salmon, Wagyu beef, and wine. I picked at a salad, trying to blend in, but I could feel the eyes glancing my way, the way people test a shaky chair they're afraid will break. And then, as the talk turned to Aspen villas and Capri vacations, Vanessa spoke. "Oh, by the way," the table went quiet. She pointed her shiny salad fork right at me. "Keep this beggar away from our table." The room froze like someone had pulled the emergency brake. I heard a spoon clink at the far end. Some looked down, ashamed, and others smirked. Daniel, my son, drew a deep breath and stared at his plate. Not a word. I sipped water, swallowed the insult, and smiled. "Beggar, is it? Then maybe I should take off this coat so it doesn't stain your tablecloth with my poverty." A few guests coughed to hide their laughter. Vanessa's face reddened, though her eyes never lost that arrogance. Oliver, innocent as ever, ran back and hugged my leg. "Grandpa, tell me about the sandcastle again." I was about to kneel when Vanessa snatched his hand. "No, you'll ruin your clothes. Go." I rose to my feet, the wooden chair creaking, the wine glasses trembling. I set the gift box down in front of my son and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "I suppose the chair I'm sitting on doesn't match her furniture collection. I'll excuse myself." I turned and walked out. My heart pounded, not from age but from humiliation. Yet under that shame, a spark flickered. They say if you want to know who truly respects you, watch how they treat you when they think you have nothing. Tonight I saw it all. As I reached the door, I heard Vanessa's voice. "Good riddance." I chuckled. Yes, good riddance. But tomorrow morning, when I step into that 40-story tower in downtown Denver, the one she believes is reserved for the elite, she'll learn what riddance really means, and who's truly being dismissed. I drove home in silence. On the seat beside me, the wooden boat box was empty, left behind on that table. I pictured Oliver finding it later, opening it, his eyes lighting up. And I knew as long as he still wanted to hear about sandcastles, I had every reason to keep my head high. If you've ever been looked down on by your own family, share your story in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. When I drove away from my son's house that night, I didn't go straight back to the small apartment I live in. I circled through downtown Denver, sitting still in my truck, watching the high-rise lights reflect on the windshield. Many of those buildings, I had once laid the first bricks myself. Now they stood tall as if mocking me. The city might forget who built it, but concrete doesn't lie. Every pillar still carries the sweat of men like me. I used to be a construction engineer. Not the kind in suits running meetings, but the kind with a hard hat, steel ruler, and curses ready when the cement came out too thin. I started on the sites, boots caked with mud, hands darkened by the sun. Back then, my two best friends, Ethan and Carl, and I were young and foolish enough to believe we could build the world. At midnight, we'd stand on half-finished sites, staring up at steel frames, clawing into the sky, and dream of the day a company would bear our names. One day we actually did it. Summit Properties Group. The name sounded grand, but when we founded it, it was just three guys in torn jeans and a sketch on scrap paper. We begged banks for loans, endured sneers. But I still remember the first project we won, a modest three-story complex on the outskirts. On the signing day, I carried a brand new Mont Blanc fountain pen I had bought with a month's wages. It came in a plain wooden box and I treated it like a promise to myself. From that day on, every signature I put down had to be worthy of the sweat behind it. 35 years have passed and that pen is still with me. It's no longer shiny, the lacquer chipped in places, but I keep it in that same wooden box in my drawer. Every time I hold it, I feel like I'm back at that first morning, when the future was still a construction site waiting to rise. Some people collect Swiss watches, vintage cars, or fine art. I kept a pen because to me, power was never stitched into a label. Real power lived in a signature that could turn blueprints into towers, ideas into homes for hundreds of families. Summit grew. From a handful of workers, we became a real estate empire across Colorado, then Utah and Arizona. We built skyscrapers, suburbs, and shopping centers. Sometimes I still can't believe it. The old laborer with sunburned hands had an office on the 40th floor overlooking the Rockies. But I never felt at home in tailored suits. My best days were weekends, wearing old khakis, dusty boots, walking onto a site to ask the crew if the cement mix was right. When Summit stood strong, I stepped back from running it. Ethan stayed on as CFO, and Carl handled development. I chose early retirement, so I wouldn't become the old man snarling at every new idea. I kept 28% of the company, enough to ensure my voice could never be ignored in the boardroom. But I didn't flaunt it. I lived in a small apartment, shopped at the supermarket like anyone else, and still drove the same pickup after more than 10 years. My son Daniel knew I was once an engineer. He'd played with old hard hats on my sites when he was little. But he never knew, or rather I never told him, that I was a founding shareholder, that I still owned nearly a third of the company. I didn't want his life smothered by my shadow. I wanted him to find his own path, and he chose finance. I thought that would spare him the comparisons. Instead, my silence let Vanessa believe I was just a poor old man scraping by on pension checks. People look at my old coat, my small apartment, and think I have nothing. The truth is, I have more than their closets full of suits. I have towers standing tall across the city. I have votes that can turn the tide of board meetings they don't even know I attend. I have a Mont Blanc pen, not to show off, but to remind me that value never lived on the surface. I remember once, about 10 years ago, a young partner was pitching ideas with wild energy. After the meeting, he shook my hand, glanced at the Mont Blanc in my pocket, and said, "Nice pen, must be expensive." I smiled. "No, it's only expensive if you don't know why you're signing." He didn't get it, but Ethan laughed out loud because he knew exactly what I meant. The night after that birthday dinner, I sat in my small living room and poured a glass of bourbon. The Mont Blanc lay in its wooden box on the table, catching the lamplight. I picked it up, turned it in my hand. In all these years, I've never used it on anything trivial. I thought of Vanessa's words, "Keep this beggar away from our table." I chuckled. If I'm a beggar, then Denver must have been built by beggars. Some people believe power is in the label of your suit, the price of your car, and the zip code of your house. I know better. Power is in a signature. The right one, at the right time, can create jobs for hundreds, rescue a project from collapse, or end the career of someone who thought respect could be bought. And I know soon enough, Vanessa will learn that truth in a way she'll never forget. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. My coffee was still steaming on the kitchen table, but my mind wasn't on its bitter sweetness. Last night, the words, "Keep this beggar away from our table," kept echoing in my head like a rusted nail hammered into wood. The more I tried to pull it out, the deeper the pain went. I knew I couldn't just let it pass as another bad play. Not because of my pride, but because there are limits. When someone crosses them and you stay silent, you become an accomplice. I pulled on my old gray coat, climbed into my pickup, and drove straight to downtown Denver. The headquarters of Summit Properties Group loomed there, glass walls catching the sky and lazy clouds. 35 years ago, I had looked up at its raw steel frame and wondered if I was insane for dreaming of building an empire. Now it was a symbol, and Vanessa, my beloved daughter-in-law, was parading it around as her stage to show off a glittering career. The guard in the lobby nodded politely. He had no idea that the old man in a wrinkled coat was still one of the company's largest shareholders. I went straight up to the top floor, where the HR files were kept. A young receptionist looked uneasy when she saw me, but I only smiled and slid an old ID across the desk. "Is Helen still here?" 10 minutes later, Helen appeared, the assistant who had worked by my side for nearly 20 years. Her hair was grayer now, but her eyes were still sharp. "Mr. Reed," she said with a smile, "I'm guessing you are not here just to chat over coffee." "No, Helen," I said quietly. "I need Vanessa Mitchell Reed's file. All of it, from the very beginning." She didn't ask why. She simply nodded and disappeared into the records room. When she returned, she set a thick bundle on the desk, bound with rubber bands. "Careful," she said. "This kind of thing can keep you up at night." I opened it and turned the pages. Just as I expected, the anger inside me grew colder, not burning but sinking like ice down my spine. The first page was her probation review, filled with flowery words. Dynamic, leadership potential, creative and communication. I almost laughed. If leadership means stepping on people, then yes, she scored perfectly. Page 12, the first complaint. Margaret, a 60-year-old in accounting, wrote that during a meeting, Vanessa had called her methods outdated, like a typewriter, and suggested maybe it was time to step aside for the younger generation. The complaint was dismissed because Vanessa claimed she was only encouraging efficiency. Page 30, the second complaint. Robert, 58, in IT. He wrote that Vanessa often called him after hours demanding help with her personal projects, then snapped at him for being slow as an old turtle. Management brushed it off, saying Vanessa had high standards. Robert ended up with a warning for being inflexible. Page 50, the third complaint. Janet, a 63-year-old night shift supervisor, had been chastised in an email for being unprofessional because she couldn't rearrange cleaning schedules at the last minute for one of Vanessa's so-called important meetings. The result, Janet was demoted to night shifts, while Vanessa was praised for keeping the schedule on track. I closed the file, fists tightening. Faces flashed in my mind. Margaret, who baked cookies every Christmas. Robert, who once revived a dead office computer for me. Janet, who stood with me in the snow, laughing while the site froze over. And Vanessa treated them as disposable, just because they weren't young or fashionable. Helen sighed softly beside me. "You see, I tried filing reports up the chain, but no one wanted to touch the rising star." I nodded. Then, like salt rubbed into an open wound, I turned to a stack of printed emails. A single line glared up at me. "Daniel is just a stepping stone for me to climb higher. I deserve a much bigger role, and I will have it." I read it again, slowly, letting each word sink in. Daniel, my son, wasn't just a fool being strung along. To her, he was nothing but a ladder rung, a wobbly piece of wood she planned to climb to break the glass ceiling. I leaned back, eyes closed. In my head, a voice dripped with sarcasm. You're good at climbing ladders, Vanessa, but you forgot who built the ladder in the first place. I opened my eyes with a cold smile. Helen looked at me as if she had seen steel flash behind my silver hair. What are you planning? She asked. I won't fire her, I said. That's too easy, too quick. Someone like Vanessa needs a long lesson, one that forces her to face the truth in the mirror. I closed the file and slid it into my bag. And I'll teach her in the only language she understands, power and work. Helen raised a brow. You mean, for now I'll give her a short trip down to the construction site, I said dryly. If she loves climbing ladders, I'll make sure she starts from the lowest rung. Helen chuckled, though her eyes stayed serious. She won't survive it. That's the point. I stood and walked into the corridor. The office buzzed with young employees hunched over screens, Starbucks cups steaming on desks. No one looked twice at the gray-haired man passing by, but I knew one stroke of my pen could change the future of an entire department. And this time, that signature would land squarely on the arrogant daughter-in-law who had forgotten that, without workers, without the old engineers, no building ever stands tall. On the drive home, I told myself, the first lesson begins soon, and I'll be the one grading it. I never believed in the so-called moral lessons preached in churches or printed in self-help books. People don't change because of a sermon or a quote. People change when life drags them into the very place they once despised. And I knew if I wanted Vanessa to understand the value of sweat, I had to return her to where it all began, the construction site. It took one signature and a single phone call. Overnight, Vanessa went from communications director with a polished office to site support staff on the reassignment list. The official reason, a rotation program to fully understand operations. It sounded reasonable. No one dared to object. I smiled as I read the memo. The only thing she didn't know, she was the program's one and only participant. On her first day on bay, Vanessa showed up at the site in spotless white sneakers and tight leggings. She looked around as if she had walked into a zoo by mistake. The sun beat down, dust swirled, drills screamed, the air thick with paint fumes. I stood in the shade with an old hard hat and reflective vest, clipboard in hand, like any other worker. No one recognized me as a founding shareholder. They only saw an old man in his 60s, back slightly bent, pen scratching on a sheet. Exactly what I wanted. The foreman handed Vanessa a simple task: carry bricks from the stockpile to the wall. She gawked. What? I have an MBA. I managed million-dollar campaigns. And now you want me to carry bricks? Robert, 58, the IT worker she once humiliated by email, shrugged. Bricks still need carrying. Your MBA won't make them walk themselves. The crew laughed. I turned away to hide my grin. Vanessa tried lifting a stack of bricks, dropped them hard, grimacing. They're impossibly heavy. Why don't you use machines? The machines are busy, Robert shot back. If you want a wall, you'll need your hands. I saw the fire flash in her eyes. She pulled out her phone and started tapping furiously. The foreman strode over. Phones are banned during work hours. Put it away. Vanessa's jaw dropped as if he had asked her to stop breathing. I noted day one, resistance, contempt for the task, and refusing reality. By noon, sweat soaked her back. Her hair was a mess, makeup smeared. She collapsed onto a crate, gasping. Luis, an older worker, offered her a bottle. Drink before you faint. Vanessa didn't thank him. She grabbed it, gulped, then sneered. I don't get how you people do this for a living. Guess you had no other choice, right? Luis frowned but kept calm. We did have a choice. We chose to feed our families. I heard it, and my chest tightened. Then I wrote, day one, still mocking labor, no recognition of dignity in work. Day two, Vanessa was assigned to clean the mortar. Within minutes, her white shoes turned gray, her hands sticky with cement. She groaned. This disgusting stuff ruined my nails. $200 gone. Robert laughed. Then call it a bad investment. Cement doesn't care if it costs $200 or 2 cents. Vanessa glared and whispered to a younger worker. Ridiculous. I used to present to entire auditoriums, and now I'm mixing cement with nobodies. I stood just behind, close enough to catch every word. In my head, I thought maybe she expects cement to tremble before her MBA. I bit my lip to hold back a laugh. I scribbled, Day 2, still belittling colleagues, no change. Day 3, light rain, the ground is slick. Vanessa tried pushing a wheelbarrow full of bricks. Too heavy, it tilted. About to spill. Luis rushed over, steadying it, saving her from a nasty fall. "Careful, miss," he said gently. "The bricks aren't the problem. The ground is wet." Warm words, but Vanessa only scoffed. "Thanks, but don't play hero. I can handle myself." The smile faded from Luis's face. I wrote, Day 3, receives help but responds with arrogance, rejects kindness. By afternoon, I stood a few paces away pretending to check ledgers. I overheard her mutter to another young worker, "This is awful. They're making me do grunt work with a bunch of old idiots. They're only good for sweeping floors." Her words cut like a blade. I glanced at the site. Those old idiots were raising walls straight and true, setting columns solid, building what her speeches could never create. I jotted down, Day 3, public humiliation of coworkers. Evidence, Day 4, her body began to wear down. Back aching, hands blistered. But instead of learning respect, her temper grew sharper. When Janet, the night shift supervisor she had once pushed aside, stopped by, Vanessa sneered, "I don't get how someone like you still manages this job. Must be all about giving orders." Janet didn't answer. She looked at her with eyes cold as steel. I knew the old wound burned fresh again. I wrote, Day 4 repeats behavior, targets past victim, proves ingrained contempt. Day 5, I decided to test her directly. Still disguised as a site worker, I swept dust nearby. Vanessa snapped, "Stop it. Stay back. If that dirt gets on me, I'll be furious," I rasped. "If you hate dust, don't work on a site. But don't forget, without dust, there's no home to live in." She waved me off. I don't need cheap philosophy from someone who's only ever pushed a broom. I lowered my head, smiling in the shadows. Day 5 not only despises laborers but mocks the cleaning trade, confirms unchanging arrogance. That night back home, I sat alone with my Mont Blanc pen. I flipped through the notebook, reading each line. Day 1, resistance. Day 2, mockery. Day 3, humiliation. Day 4, repeat offense. Day 5, derision. Not a flicker of remorse. Vanessa hadn't learned a thing except new reasons to despise others. I sipped bourbon and whispered to myself, "You climb ladders well, Vanessa. But you forgot. I built a ladder, and I can pull it away anytime I choose." I chose Friday because, after 5 days on the construction site, Vanessa looked more like a caged animal than the so-called creative communications director she once claimed to be. I told Helen to send a formal notice. Vanessa Mitchell-Reed, required to appear at the shareholders' boardroom. 10 a.m. no explanation, no details. That alone would keep her awake all night. I arrived early and sat in the chairman's seat. The leather-backed chair had once annoyed me, too heavy, too ostentatious. But today it fits me perfectly. On the table, I stacked the HR records neatly, clipped the printed emails separately. Beside them was my notebook from the last 5 days on site, filled with my handwriting. I wanted her to see that truth doesn't just live on a computer or in an HR report. At exactly 10, the door opened. Vanessa walked in, hair tied hastily, lipstick smudged, a cheap shirt bought in a rush to replace the office dresses ruined by site dust. She looked around, clearly expecting some anonymous HR officer to bargain with. Then her eyes met mine. First came confusion, then shock. Finally, horror. "You, what are you doing here?" I leaned back, voice steady. "Hello, Vanessa. Have a seat." She froze as if the floor had turned to ice. "No, no, this can't be. You can't what? Sit in this chair. Hold this file." I tapped the cover. "Both. I can. I was here before you even graduated high school. This chair, this company, these very walls you're standing between, I poured concrete into them. Who exactly do you think you're talking to?" Vanessa dropped into a seat, face pale. I let the silence work its way through her bones. "I have here," I said as I opened the file, 3 official complaints. One from Margaret Chen, 60 years old, humiliated by you in a meeting. One from Robert Williams, forced to work after hours on your personal projects. And one from Janet Rodriguez, pushed onto night shifts because she couldn't instantly rearrange a cleaning schedule. All with evidence. Vanessa tried to recover her voice, but it trembled. Those, those were just misunderstandings. I, I have high standards. I cut her off, sliding a printed email across the table. And what is this? Daniel is just a stepping stone for me to climb higher. This is not a misunderstanding. These are your words. Her face flushed, then drained white. I didn't blink. You used my son, my family, as your ladder. And you kicked dirt in the faces of everyone who worked their whole lives here. If you thought you could climb forever unnoticed, you forgot who built the ladder. The room was dead quiet. Vanessa bit her lip, then burst out. This is personal revenge. You hated me after that birthday dinner, so now you're trying to humiliate me. This has nothing to do with work. I laughed, low and cold. Revenge. I don't need revenge. I'm simply doing what you did to others. You filed reports, wrote complaints, and invented excuses to push them down. The only difference is, this time, the report is mine. Her fingers clawed into the armrest. You don't have the right to ruin my career. Right, I leaned forward. I own 28% of this company. I sat in the meeting where we voted to build this very tower. Do you really think I need someone's permission? Vanessa said nothing. I let her drown in the silence before I spoke again. But I'll give you a choice. One, you keep working on the site, hauling bricks, mixing cement, sweeping dust. You'll stay there as long as I see fit. And maybe if you open your eyes, you'll learn something about dignity in work. Two, you resign today. I'll sign you a neutral reference, just marketing experience, nothing more. You leave quietly with a shred of face left. Which will it be? She shot to her feet, eyes blazing. You want me to become a janitor on a construction site just to feed your old man ego? You think you're so smart. You're nothing but a bitter old man, afraid to make room for the next generation. I stood as well, slowly until our eyes were level. Maybe so, but at least my generation respects the work of others. My generation didn't marry just to use a husband as a ladder. I lowered my voice, each word sharp. In my generation, when we said I signed this, it meant a building rose from the ground. Not an empty PowerPoint slide. Her eyes burned. She gasped, lips trembling, but no words came. I opened the door and gestured. You have the weekend to decide. On Monday, you either show up with a hard hat at the site or a resignation letter in hand. I don't need to hear another excuse. She stood shaking, then stumbled out. When the door shut, I sank back into the chair and let out a breath. My heart raced, not from fear, but from relief. The cards were on the table. All that remained was her choice. I looked down at my notebook, the last page marked with one line. Private confrontation. Truth revealed. I closed it and slipped on my Mont Blanc pen back into its wooden case. My next signature would decide the rest of her life. And strangely, I felt no triumph. Only a cold stillness, as if I had just laid the final block of concrete onto a wall. The work was complete. The work. The phone rang on Sunday night. I was in my small apartment, pouring myself a glass of bourbon, when the screen lit up. Daniel. My son rarely called at this hour, and my heart already knew something was wrong. Dad, his voice was tight, hoarse, as if he'd been arguing. I need to talk to you about Vanessa, about what happened at the company. I leaned back on the sofa, tapping my finger lightly against the glass. I suppose she's told you everything in her own version. You abused your power to settle a personal score, Daniel blurted, like he was repeating the exact script his wife had fed him. What happened at that dinner? You can't drag family emotions into the company. That's not you, that's abuse. I stayed silent for a few seconds, letting the ticking of the living room clock seep into the pause. Then I spoke slowly. Then come here. Both of you. We'll talk as a family. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. The next evening, right on time, I opened the door to Daniel and Vanessa. My son wore a pale blue shirt, tie loose, looking like a banker just out of an 8-hour audit. Vanessa was different. Business dress pressed, hair straightened, lipstick sharp red, but her eyes wary. She was clearly staging herself as the professional wife wronged. I poured coffee and invited them to sit on the old sofa that had been with me for over 20 years. Vanessa wrinkled her nose at the worn fabric. I deliberately didn't pour bourbon tonight. I wanted everyone sober. Daniel spoke first, voice tight with anger. Dad, I don't understand why you did it. Demoting my wife to the construction site, forcing her to work like a laborer. What were you trying to prove? That you can crush anyone just because you're a founding shareholder? I looked straight into his eyes. Son, if I had wanted to crush her, she wouldn't be sitting here tonight. I wanted to give her a chance to learn, but maybe she never wanted to learn anything at all. Vanessa scoffed, arms folded. Ridiculous. You want to teach me? I'm an adult. I have an MBA. I've managed million-dollar campaigns. I don't need an old man turning a job site into a classroom for his moral lessons. I nodded. Your MBA must be useful, especially when you write emails calling your husband a stepping stone. I pulled the file from the drawer, laid a printed page on the table. Daniel looked down and I saw the color drain from his face. Daniel is just a stepping stone for me to climb higher. The words glared back in black ink, undeniable. Daniel's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Vanessa, what is this? She blinked, then forced a laugh. Daniel, that was just a joke, a private email. I never thought anyone would read it. You know me, I slip up sometimes. Sarcastically. I cut in, voice sharp as steel. When a joke shatters trust, it stops being a joke. It becomes a confession. Daniel swallowed hard. His hand trembled as he held the page. Vanessa, you joke by calling me a ladder, a tool? No, you're twisting it, she said quickly, her eyes flicking toward me. He's blowing this out of proportion to divide us. I love you. I just wanted you to see I have ambition. I wanted us to go further by using me as a step. Daniel's voice broke. That's what you call love. The room fell into silence, broken only by the tick of the clock. I leaned back, letting my son finally stare at the truth he had refused to face. Vanessa fiddled with her hair, forcing a smile, but her hand gripped her skirt tightly. Daniel, I said softly but firmly, I don't need to prove that Vanessa married you for ambition, not love. Her own words have already proven it. Daniel looked at the page, then at his wife. In his eyes, doubt and pain began to replace the anger he'd walked in with. I saw my son, who once believed love could conquer everything, crumbling. Vanessa grabbed for his hand. Don't let him twist you like this. He hated me from the start. He never accepted me because he wants to keep you for himself. Daniel pulled away. His eyes for the first time were cold. No, Vanessa, I was just blind. I let out a long breath. Son, I never wanted to destroy your marriage, but the truth carries its own weight, and you can't fight it forever. Vanessa shot to her feet, her voice shrill. All this over one stupid email. You'll destroy my family for that? I stayed calm. Families aren't destroyed by a single email. They're destroyed by the attitude behind it. You can delete the words, but you can't erase the contempt in your heart. Daniel sat, hands clutching his head. His shoulders shook, as if 10 years of weight had collapsed on him at once. I wanted to reach out and hold him, but I knew this was his moment to face the shadow he had invited into his life. So I said only one thing, the hammer that sealed the coffin shut. Son, sometimes the hardest truth is realizing the person beside you in bed never loved you. They only loved the ladder they thought you could be. Vanessa spun toward me, eyes blazing. But this time no excuse could mask the truth already laid bare. And Daniel, for the first time in years, did not defend her. His eyes glistened, but his voice was steady. Dad, I need time. But I see it now. I nodded, my hand tightening around the coffee cup. I wasn't glad. I wasn't triumphant. There was only a cold sorrow. The sorrow of a father watching his son finally open his eyes, but at the cost of his marriage. Board meetings at Summit Properties Group were usually dull affairs filled with PowerPoint slides, revenue charts, and sugar-coated speeches from the executives. But that morning the air was different, tight as a wire waiting for a hand to pluck it. And I, Jonathan Reed, 62 years old, sat in the chairman's seat, my hand resting on a leather notebook and a Mont Blanc pen, ready to be that hand. Below, the rows were packed, familiar faces of shareholders, department heads, and even a few veteran employees were invited to observe. Vanessa sat in the second row, gray business suit, red lips, feigned confidence in her eyes but trembling hands on her lap. Beside her, Daniel sat stiff, face locked, like a man awaiting trial. I tapped the pen against the table, the sound sharp in the silent room. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are not here to discuss projects or profits. We are here for something far more important: company culture, how we treat one another. The room stirred. I opened the file and read aloud, my voice slow, deliberate. Daniel is just a stepping stone for me to climb higher. I deserve a much bigger position, and I will have it. I looked up, eyes fixed on Vanessa. This email was sent from the internal account of Miss Vanessa Mitchell Reed, Communications Director. I want everyone to hear every word because it does not only insult my son, it reveals how she views this company and its people as rungs on a ladder to step on. Whispers spread. Some shareholders frowned, others sighed. Vanessa leapt to her feet, face flushed. You can't. That was a private email. It has nothing to do with... I raised a hand, cutting her off, voice calm but edged with steel. Nothing to do with this. When a leader sees colleagues, and even her family, as mere steps to climb, every project she touches is poisoned. And this is not the only evidence. I nodded toward the door. It opened, and Margaret Chen entered. 60 years old, small frame, but eyes are sharp. Margaret, would you recount what happened in last year's budget meeting? She drew a breath, voice trembling, but clear. Vanessa pointed at me in front of everyone, said my methods were outdated like a typewriter, and hinted I should retire to make way for the young. I have worked here for 30 years. I had never been humiliated like that. Murmurs erupted. I continued. Robert Williams, please. Robert, salt and pepper hair, calloused hands, stepped forward. She called me after hours, made me fix her personal computer projects. When I was slow, she called me an old turtle. I honestly thought I no longer had a place here. Then came Janet Rodriguez, still carrying her hard hat. I was once a day shift supervisor. When I couldn't rearrange cleaning schedules at her last-minute demand, Vanessa reported me as unprofessional. I was demoted to nights. To this day, I don't understand how a person's dignity can be crushed so easily. The room went silent. Vanessa shrieked, her voice cracking. This is staged. He just wants to humiliate me. I rose, hand resting on the Mont Blanc, voice steady but cutting. No, I am simply repeating what you said and did. This is not my script. This is history you wrote yourself. I glanced down. Daniel sat hunched, fists clenched. Then suddenly he stood. His voice broke but carried through the chamber. Dad, I'm sorry. Sorry for not believing you. Sorry for letting it come to this. The boardroom froze. My vision blurred, but I only nodded. Son, better late than never. Vanessa spun toward him, panic in her eyes. You have to stand by me. This is his scheme. He never accepted me. Daniel cut her off, his voice for the first time solid as fresh concrete. No, Vanessa, this isn't a scheme. This is the truth, and I can't close my eyes anymore. An elderly shareholder cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Mr. Reed, the board wants to know, what is your decision? I closed the file slowly, like closing a trial. My decision, and the board's if they agree, is to strip Miss Vanessa Mitchell Reed of her position, effective immediately. She will be reassigned to site labor, to learn that every job carries dignity. And if she refuses, she may resign today. Pens tapped, heads nodded. Some eyes turned toward Vanessa, cold as steel. She screamed, her voice breaking apart. You can't do this to me. I am a director. You were a director, I said clearly. Now you are a trainee, and if you're fortunate, you'll learn what your MBA never taught you: respect. Vanessa trembled, searching the room, but found no allies. Daniel placed his hand on the table, voice steady. From today, I am separating from you. I cannot live with someone who saw me only as a rung to climb. The words struck like nails sealing a coffin. Vanessa collapsed into her seat, lipstick smudged, eyes frantic. I returned to the chairman's seat, feeling not victory, but heavy silence. I had not humiliated anyone. I had only turned on the light so everyone could see the stain already there. In that moment, I looked around the boardroom, the place where I once signed my first contract with Mont Blanc. I knew then, this company would endure not because of ladder climbers, but because of those who sweat for real work. Injustice sometimes only needs one meeting to surface. 6 months after that fateful meeting, Summit Properties Group was no longer the company I once feared would be poisoned by ladder climbers. We launched a new initiative called Respect Legacy, a written pledge that every employee over 50 deserved to be protected, heard, and valued. On launch day, I stood in the grand hall and looked at the front row. Margaret, Robert, and Janet. They wore company uniforms, sat tall, eyes bright. When I announced that their years of experience would be treated as assets, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. Some of the younger employees even rose to their feet, clapping until their palms turned red. In that moment, I knew we had laid a new foundation, a culture of respect. Strangely enough, when the overlooked were restored their dignity, the company itself grew stronger. Employees stayed longer, projects ran smoothly, and clients trusted us more. Productivity didn't come from pushing people down, but from lifting them up. Vanessa never understood that truth, and she was no longer here to learn it. At home, the fractures in our family slowly began to mend. Daniel filed for legal separation, pouring his energy into raising Oliver. I saw him maturing, less dependent on false validation, and more often I found him listening intently as I told stories of the old job sites. Oliver grew quickly like a young sapling. One afternoon, he ran through the park wearing a red plastic hard hat. He stacked two wooden blocks together and shouted, "I'm going to build a house like Grandpa." His laughter echoed across the playground, and even the elderly couples on the benches laughed with him. I watched him and felt something no boardroom could ever buy. The certainty that my legacy was not in stock shares, but in a grandson who believed building meant creating trust. That evening, I sat alone in my quiet apartment, turned on the desk lamp, and opened the old wooden box. Inside lay the Mont Blanc pen, darkened with age. I held it, signed a few routine papers. The black ink still flowed smoothly, a reminder that real power doesn't need shouting, pounding fists, or empty displays. Sometimes all it takes is a signature, a decision made at the right moment to change a life. I smiled, set the pen back into its box, and closed the lid. My true legacy was never locked inside a bank vault. It lived in the bricks of trust I had spent a lifetime laying down. Have you ever witnessed the truth turn everything upside down? Share your story in the comments and tell me where you were watching from. And if you believe silence and truth will always win, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This is where silent revenge is told, where betrayal collapses on itself and those once cast aside reclaim their worth.